New optical switches, a multifunctional dial, new keycap font finally, a standard bottom row, and lubed and improved stabilizers? Corsair has been listening. What's up guys, I'm randomfrankp, and today's video is all about the brand new flagship release, the K100 Optical RGB mechanical keyboard. This is the follow-up from the very popular 2017 release of the K95 Platinum, but now they bumped it up 5 points to the K100. So Corsair are finally delivering with their own lineup of optical mechanical switches. There's a lot to go over here, lots of new features. So if you're interested in this keyboard, maybe you're thinking of picking it up, you want to buy one yourself, we'll go over it all in this review. So visually, first up out of the box, the new features will stand out right away to you, as the keyboard has enough, changes to warrant a new product name, but it's still familiar to the product lineup and builds from previous releases. The board is still pretty nice looking with that brushed aluminum and the black anodization to it, so it'll look very clean if you can keep it that way. That's always the double-edged sword to the brushed aluminum. Looks nice, but you have to keep it looking nice. And surrounding the board is a subtle 44-zone strip of LED lights they call Light Edge. And I say, subtle, kind of jokingly, because RGB is never subtle. But now, instead of having a light strip running along the top of the keyboard like we saw on the K95, it's behind the top of the keyboard, running along the backside, with strips on the left and right side of the board illuminating as well. But the board itself is very well made, there's no flex to the frame at all, and overall, for it being a full-size layout, it's still pretty slim looking, which I really like. So checking out some of the new features, returning on the top is the dedicated multimedia keys with a bit of a construction change. The mute button is now flat and it's kind of embedded into the frame, and it has this even illumination around it. And the 4 playback buttons underneath are now this sort of glossy top to the key. Speaking of glossy, another change comes on the forehead of the keyboard, where you have the illuminated Corsair logo and the key indicators. So here's where the macro LEDs are, the mute, Windows lock indicators, caps lock, scroll lock. Those are now all gonna shine through here, and I will say I'm pretty conflicted of this particular design choice, since it's like a quarter of the top of the board, and it's just this glossy strip, embedded into the brushed aluminum. It stands out kind of weirdly. But one of the more interesting additions comes with a new dial on the top left. This is going to have a few different uses depending on what you want to configure it as inside the iCUE software, but out of the box it does have a few presets that are already assigned to it. So when you press that center iCUE logo, which itself is actually a button, you'll notice it shine a certain color. Red is for recording macros, blue is for adjusting the brightness of your RGB lights, so a real quick and easy way to just dim or increase the lighting. You can use this to jog through music, zoom in and out of windows, switch applications, vertical scrolling, horizontal scrolling, plus the ability to obviously go inside of iCUE, switch it up, customize it. And I've always welcomed something like this on a keyboard just to add more and more functionality to it. The ring itself is knurled on the outside, and the left side of the dial is your profile key for switching your hardware profiles. On the right side is the Windows lock. And then obviously, as we've come to expect, on the left side of the keyboard, you have your 6 dedicated macro keys, G1 through G6. The keycaps here do have this metallic finish to kind of separate them from the rest of the keys. And these can be any sort of function or macro you create. Plus, it still has the integration with Elgato Stream Deck, so those streaming shortcuts you have or functions, whatever you use, could also be set to use here. Some other visual things to touch on before we move on to the keys and switches. Inside the box, they now include a new redesigned magnetic wrist rest. Definitely welcomed. The foam they use inside here is memory foam. It's nice and soft, but it also has this slight texture pattern on it, and love it or hate it, I don't know, you have the little Corsair branding there, just smack dab in the middle of the wrist rest. I will say though, this one is miles better than any wrist rest they put out in the past. Really liking this one. And since it's magnetic, it just clips right onto the bottom of the keyboard. No longer do we have those plastic clips scratching the brushed aluminum every time like we did in years past. Then also, while we're here underneath, we still have the cable channels for routing cables nice and cleanly underneath. We have the USB pass-through on the back side, so if you plug something in there, you can just route it nicely on the bottom side. You still have the 4 rubber pads on the top and bottom corners, and the feet now are flip out feet. They flip outward instead of up and down. This is just to prevent it from ever collapsing on itself in case you ever applied more weight to the keyboard. Sometimes the flip up feet would just give out and fold back up. Okay, so moving on, Corsair did right by us by not only switching the font to a less bold and aggressive looking character here, but the PBT double shot keycaps now have this nice slight bit of texture to it, so they're never gonna fade out and have that shine to them. And after all these years, we finally have a standard bottom row. Never thought I'd see the day, but now you can buy custom keycap sets and use them fully with the standard bottom row. And included inside the box is also an additional set of FPS and MOBA keycaps. These are just the textured alternative keycaps if you want to swap them out and use them instead. But now we can talk gaming and performance with their brand new optical switches known as OPX. The OPX switches are designed by Corsair. It uses that infrared light beam to actuate and send the signal right to your PC with zero debounce, and we can finally eliminate any key chattering issues, which have been plaguing my K95 units since last year. And these new switches are very fast. They actuate at only 1 millimeter with 45 grams force, with a total travel distance of 3.2 millimeters. They're also rated for 150 million keystrokes. So longevity is improved, speed is improved. Optical switches are an improvement in pretty much every regard. You can see now with the RGB lighting and that top crystal shell on the switch, it's very clear and bright. The RGB shines through nicely. You even have the little Corsair logo now instead of the cherry logo. So thank you, Corsair. Was waiting for your guys' optical switch. And now for my experience using these new switches. And most of you guys know I always prefer a linear switch as it is. And I've been using these speed silver switches for the past 2 years. And these actuate at 1 millimeter versus the 1.2 millimeters. Do I notice that? No, obviously not. But the properties are similar. You know, the feel and the response overall doesn't feel that different to me since they are just very quick and linear. And that's good because when you are gaming, you want that fast switch advantage. But also to someone who maybe, you know, hasn't tried speed switches in the past, if you pick these up, you're definitely gonna feel pretty early on that shorter actuation distance. Especially if you can train your fingers to just lightly actuate the keys at the 1 millimeter point instead of bottoming out your keys, you will definitely feel a difference. And again, since these are optical switches, that signal is sent right to your PC. You couple that with their new Axon CPU inside the keyboard, which allows for 4,000 hertz polling over the standard 1,000 hertz polling on most keyboards, and it's gonna still feel lightning fast. And also real quick with that new CPU, it's actually doing a lot for this keyboard, you know, behind the scenes. It allows for more onboard storage capabilities with holding up to 200 macros and lighting profiles, 20 layers of hardware lighting effects, and that's all gonna be able to be saved on the keyboard. So you can bring this to a new PC and have all those lighting effects and macros still saved onto the keyboard itself. So you don't even technically need iCUE because the K100 also has 10 preset lighting effects on the keyboard itself, saved with function 1 through 10, so you can just go through and cycle the effects. And macro recording can still be done on the keyboard itself, but obviously for a better customizing experience, you can go into iCUE and do all that deeper customizing there. But yeah, before we go deeper into RGB and iCUE, my experience so far gaming with this has been great, but also, like I said, relatively unchanged since I'm used to that fast linear switch experience. But in the end, what it comes down to is that these are better switches in every regard, faster, more reliable, and more efficient than a traditional mechanical switch. All right, so now we'll do a sound test of their linear OPX optical switches. All right, so a few things to touch on as we heard from that sound test. One, these stabilizers here, that now that they're lubed, they sound miles better than years past. You heard it too with the space bar. It just sounds so much better than any stabilizer we've had on previous Corsair keyboards. Not only are they factory lubing stabilizers now, but they also ditched that wire that would just rattle to no end. So thank God, or thank you, Corsair. And also for the switches themselves, as a reference compared to what I'm used to with the speed silver switches, those are always like a higher pitched. So now they sound a lot more solid, and you combine that with the PBT keycaps, and it's a more satisfying switch sound and feel. But what's not satisfying, as you also probably heard, is the dial and that iCUE button. I do wish when you were scrolling on that dial it had more of a tactile kind of sharpness to it. But with that iCUE button, when you press it in, it just feels very out of place and it's shifty. It kind of feels like it wasn't supposed to be a button and then they added it. It's just very meh feeling. And that'll bring me to my next point, which is, why is that iQ logo even there? Like, when have we ever seen a company have their software logo on a keyboard? So when I first saw pictures of this keyboard, I thought that was actually an LED screen, and whatever function you had on the dial could be displayed there. That would have been cool. And again, like I said in the past, in previous videos, they have the technology. We've seen it with the Elgato Stream Deck and stuff. So I wish they could integrate something like that into the keyboard with a screen. I just don't like having the iQ logo and button there. I don't know, I just think it's weird. Now, when talking a screen integration onto the keyboard, this is still compatible with their Nexus attachment, but still, that's an optional accessory. It's also an extra $100, but you get what I'm saying. I wish we had that customizable screen on the keyboard. Also, that iQ button itself can't actually be customized. It's solely for cycling between the functions of what that dial does. And I get that, but it would have been nice to still be able to kind of, change that up. But going even further, I wish iQ would have a bit of a 2020 refresh to it. The dial itself, like I said, out of the box, does have those stock presets, but if you were to start making your own profiles and stuff, you're now gonna have to manually configure what the dial does. And that's definitely a bit of a annoying and tedious task, because first you have to go and sort of make your own actions or make your own macros manually, and then manually apply them to what each the left and right direction of that dial is gonna be. And then you have to go to the dial tab to do that. So I wish it just had a bunch of kind of preset actions, like a library of things already configured for us that we could just drag and drop, not manually create every task every single time. iQ, though, is still relatively unchanged. Here you can go in and switch up all the RGB lighting. And like I said, you have those 44 zones. They're all configurable. You can change each individual zone to a different color, or, just change up the effects in unison, have it all sync and go to whatever sort of RGB rainbow show you want. But again, if you don't want to use iQ to configure the RGB lights, you have those 10 onboard profiles already out of the box. So the Actions tab is where you create the macros or reassign keys. You have Actions Library, which is a listing of your current created actions. Then you have the Lighting Effects tab and Lighting Library, Hardware Lighting, and Hardware Library. Just seems repetitive to me, all these tabs. Corsair, please give this a nice polish, okay? And by the way, guys, out of the box, with this keyboard, it's actually set to just 1000 Hertz. So you will need to change it to 4000 Hertz manually in the iQ settings to actually take advantage of the speed. I feel like there's just too many hoops to jump through to be able to properly configure this keyboard. All right, so quick recap. Brand new lightning fast optical switches known as OPX. They feel very, very nice. New keycaps, a less aggressive gamer looking font, which is always good. We also have a standard bottom row, big thumbs up for that. Still have the macro keys, dedicated media keys, and the multifunctional dial. So altogether, like function and feature wise, it's a very good keyboard. But it doesn't come without its cons, and there definitely are a few. First thing, like I said, configuring the wheel can kind of be annoying, especially if you don't really know what you're doing inside of iQ. So I wish that was a bit simplified. Second, I'm still pretty torn for the decision to go all gloss here on this indicator section. Just doesn't really fit in with the aesthetic, and I found myself cleaning this like every 10 minutes because somehow just handling it, it gets fingerprints all over it. And third, I'm a man of the people. I'm on your guys' side. It's an expensive keyboard, okay? It's their premium flagship release now, and it's $230. You compare that to the K95 Platinum, which was $200 when it released. That was still their top of the line flagship release. So now we're getting that price tag, but bumped up $30. Bit of a premium for some optical switches and the wheel and stuff. But also you look at what Razer just released with their Black Widow V3 Pro. That's also $230. So I feel like Razer put it at that price, and Corsair said, okay, we're direct competitors. We can also release our flagship new keyboard at the same price. So like I said, I'm on your guys' side. I wish that was a lot cheaper. $200 would even still be fair for it, considering that's their flagship kind of price point. But it's still, in the end, if you're talking about features, performance with the switches and stuff, as a gaming keyboard, if you're not looking for the custom and stuff in the custom keyboard market, for a pre-built like this, it's definitely a pretty good keyboard. It's gonna be my main gaming keyboard going forward, replacing my old K95 Platinum. Finally, because now I don't have to deal with the key chattering issues that I've had for the past year. We can finally get rid of that with the new optical switches. So I definitely think it's a great, great keyboard. If you wanna check it out, I'll put a link for you in the description down below. And guys, that'll wrap it up for this review of the Corsair K100 Optical RGB keyboard. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, give this video a big thumbs up to show your support. Feel free to follow me on Twitter at randomfrankp. And lastly, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. I hope you enjoyed. Have a good day.